The crack of the rifle shot echoed through the mountains as the sun rose over Los Alamos, New Mexico Territory, 1879. Theodora Jensen's hands tightened on the worn leather reins, her heart hammering in her chest as her horse reared. Pain shot through her useless legs, strapped to the saddle with leather bindings of her own design, as she fought to maintain control of the frightened animal. "Easy, Maple," she whispered, stroking the mare's neck while scanning the rocky terrain. Another shot cracked the morning stillness, and this time she spotted a wisp of smoke rising from behind a boulder 50 yards ahead. Outlaws. Again, Theodora had been traveling for 2 weeks, her journey from Santa Fe marked by hardship at every turn. She'd been robbed once already, left with only her horse, her crippled legs, and the wedding dress carefully folded in her saddlebag. A wedding dress for a ceremony that would never happen. "Show yourself," she called, drawing the small pistol from beneath her shawl. "I've nothing worth taking." A man emerged from behind the rocks, tall and lean with a weathered face and eyes that reminded her of winter skies. He held his rifle at his side, not pointed at her, which was something at least. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Xavier Fleming, I wasn't shooting at you." "Hunting breakfast is all." Theodora didn't lower her pistol. "Rather close to the trail for hunting, Mr. Fleming," he nodded, his expression serious. "Saw movement, thought you were a deer at first light." His eyes flickered to her legs, taking in the straps that held them to the saddle, then quickly back to her face. To his credit, his expression didn't change. "Heading to Los Alamos?" "I am." She finally lowered her pistol, too exhausted to maintain her guard. 2 weeks of sleeping under the stars, of struggling to mount and dismount her horse, of rationing her dwindling supplies had taken their toll. Xavier approached slowly, hands visible. "Town's still 5 miles, sun's getting hot. I've got coffee brewing at my camp just over the ridge." Theodora hesitated. Trust had cost her dearly in the past. "I'm the marshal in Los Alamos," he added, pulling back his coat to reveal a silver star pinned to his vest. "Just returning from tracking some horse thieves." Something in his steady gaze convinced her, or perhaps it was just exhaustion. "Coffee would be welcome, Marshal." Xavier's camp was simple but neat. A small fire crackled beneath a pot of coffee that smelled better than anything Theodora could remember. He helped her dismount with efficient courtesy, not making a fuss over her legs, simply supporting her weight as she directed him to set her on a flat rock near the fire. "What brings you to Los Alamos?" he asked, handing her a tin cup of strong black coffee. Theodora took a sip before answering. "I was to be married." My fiancé was a man of business in Los Alamos. We corresponded for 8 months after he placed an advertisement seeking a wife." She stared into her coffee. "He didn't know about my legs, I didn't tell him." Xavier added a stick to the fire. "You're still heading to town?" "I have nowhere else to go," Theodora said simply. "My parents died last winter. The farm was sold to pay their debts, I thought." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought." "What happened to your legs?" Xavier asked, his voice gentle. "Fever when I was 16. It took my ability to walk but left me alive. Some days I'm not sure if that was mercy or cruelty." She looked up at him defiantly. "I can still ride, I can still shoot, I can still think." "Never doubted it," Xavier said, a slight smile crossing his face. "Los Alamos could use more people who can do those things." They finished their coffee in companionable silence before Xavier helped her back onto her horse. "What will you do in town?" he asked as they rode side by side along the dusty trail. Theodora lifted her chin. "Find work. I can read and write, I can keep accounts." "Town's growing, might be opportunities." He paused. "Your fiancé, what's his name?" "Lawrence Blackwell. He owns the Mercantile." Xavier's expression darkened. "Blackwell, you know him?" "Everyone knows everyone in Los Alamos." He fell silent for a long moment. "Miss Jensen, there are some things you should know before we reach town." What Xavier told her as they rode made Theodora's stomach clench with a mixture of dread and relief. Lawrence Blackwell was indeed a businessman, but his reputation was far from respectable. He ran card games in the back of his store, lending money at ruinous rates to desperate miners and ranchers. He'd been married twice before both wives had mysteriously departed after short marriages, leaving Blackwell considerably wealthier. The last one died just 3 months ago. "Fell down the stairs," he said. Xavier's voice was flat. No stairs in Los Alamos steep enough to kill a healthy woman if you ask me. And yet he walks free, Theodora observed. No evidence, just whispers. Xavier studied her profile. I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news. Theodora surprised herself by laughing, a short, bitter sound. Don't be. You've done me a service. Better to know now than after I'd tied myself to such a man. They crested a hill, and Los Alamos spread before them a collection of wooden buildings strung along a wide main street, with houses and smaller businesses branching off to either side. A church steeple rose above the other rooftops, white and stark against the blue New Mexico sky. It's larger than I expected, Theodora remarked. Railroads coming through next year, towns growing fast. Xavier pointed to various buildings. That's my office next to the jail. The White Dove Hotel has clean rooms. Mrs. Palmer, who runs it, is a good woman. As they rode down the main street, Theodora felt eyes upon her. It wasn't unusual. Her custom saddle and the straps that secured her legs always drew stares. She'd grown accustomed to curiosity, even pity. What she couldn't abide was being dismissed. Xavier escorted her to the hotel, a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a wide front porch. Mrs. Palmer, he called as they entered the cool dimness of the lobby. Got a new guest for you. A stout woman with silver-streaked brown hair emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. Her shrewd eyes took in Theodora's travel-worn appearance and Xavier's presence at her side. Marshal, she nodded, then smiled at Theodora. Welcome to Los Alamos, Miss Theodora Jensen. Miss Jensen needs a room, Xavier said. Ground floor if you have one. Understanding flickered in Mrs. Palmer's eyes as she noticed how Xavier supported Theodora's weight. Of course. I have just the one at the back with a lovely view of the garden. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath the window. Mrs. Palmer bustled about, pouring fresh water into the basin and opening the window to let in the breeze. Dinner's at 6, she said. But I can bring something up if you're tired from your journey. Thank you, but I'll come down, Theodora replied. Pride demanded it, though her body craved rest. After Mrs. Palmer departed, Xavier lingered in the doorway. I'll be back this evening to check on you, perhaps escort you to dinner. Theodora raised an eyebrow. Is that the service you provide to all new arrivals, Marshal? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Only the ones who might need protection from Lawrence Blackwell. After he left, Theodora unpacked her meager belongings, including the wedding dress. It was a simple creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, her mother's dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. She'd spent hours working on it during the long winter evenings after her parents' death, each stitch a prayer for a better future. Now she spread it across the bed, studying it in the afternoon light. So much hope sewn into its seams, and all for nothing. With sudden decision, she folded it carefully and placed it back in her saddlebag. Perhaps Mrs. Palmer knew someone who might buy it. Theodora couldn't afford sentimentality. She needed funds to survive. She washed the dust from her face and hands, changed into her one good dress, a dark blue calico that showed little dirt, and arranged her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The crutches she relied on were carved from ash, worn smooth from years of use. They extended to just below her armpits, allowing her to swing her useless legs forward in a slow but steady rhythm. By the time Xavier returned that evening, Theodora had composed herself. She would not wallow in self-pity or disappointment. Los Alamos hadn't turned out as she'd hoped, but it was still a fresh start. Xavier knocked at precisely 6 o'clock. He'd changed into a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. Miss Jensen, he said with a slight bow. May I escort you to dinner? You may, she replied, taking up her crutches. Though I warn you, I move slowly. I'm in no hurry, he said, falling into step beside her as they made their way down the hall. The hotel's dining room was half full, conversations dying briefly as they entered. Theodora kept her head high, ignoring the curious glances. Xavier led her to a table in the corner, positioning her chair so she could see the entire room. A lawman's habit, he explained as he took the seat opposite. Never sit with your back to the door. They had just been served bowls of fragrant beef stew when the dining room door swung open with force. A tall man strode in, expensively dressed in a black suit and brocade waistcoat. His beard was neatly trimmed, his hair slicked back with pomade. He surveyed the room with the air of a man accustomed to deference. "Blackwell," Xavier said quietly, and Theodora felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Lawrence Blackwell's gaze swept the room and landed on their table. Recognition flared in his eyes as he looked at Theodora, followed quickly by shock and then most telling disgust. He approached their table, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Miss Jensen, I presume, your arrival is unexpected." Theodora met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwell." "I sent word of my journey." "Indeed, but I received no mention of your—" His eyes flicked to the crutches propped against the wall beside her. "Condition." "Just as your letters failed to mention certain aspects of your character," she replied evenly. Blackwell's face hardened. "I see the Marshal has been poisoning your mind with his baseless accusations." "They don't seem baseless to me," Theodora said. "You've had a long journey." Blackwell's voice dripped with false concern. "Perhaps you're overtired. We can discuss our arrangement tomorrow." "There is nothing to discuss," Theodora said firmly. "Our arrangement, as you call it, is terminated." Blackwell's face flushed dark red. "You came all this way to jilt me, a cripple with no prospects, no family, rejecting me." He laughed harshly. "Who do you think would have you?" "What will you do now?" Xavier rose slowly to his feet. Though he stood several inches shorter than Blackwell, there was something in his quiet stance that made the larger man step back. "Miss Jensen is under my protection," Xavier said, his voice low. "I suggest you leave her be." Blackwell's lip curled. "Your protection, how touching, the cripple and the half-breed Marshal." He straightened his waistcoat. "Enjoy your dinner. And Miss Jensen, when you realize your mistake, my offer remains open, though perhaps with adjusted terms." He stalked away, and conversation gradually resumed around them. Theodora released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Half-breed?" she asked quietly. Xavier shrugged as he sat back down. "My mother was Navajo. My father was an army doctor at the fort." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. They ate in silence for a few moments before Theodora spoke again. "He called you baseless. Most people in town believe Blackwell pushed his last wife down those stairs," Xavier said, "but believing isn't the same as proving. And you? What do you believe?" Xavier's eyes, gray as storm clouds, met hers. "I believe he's dangerous to women who disappoint him, which is why you'll stay at the hotel where I can keep an eye on you until we figure out your next steps." Theodora raised an eyebrow. "Los Alamos looks after its own," Xavier said simply. "I've been in town less than a day. I'm hardly its own. You are now." He broke off a piece of cornbread. "Besides, the school teacher left last month to get married. Town needs someone who can read and write and keep accounts." Hope fluttered in Theodora's chest, but she tamped it down. The town council would never hire a crippled woman. "The town council consists of Reverend Matthews, Dr. Sullivan, and myself," Xavier said mildly. "Reverend's wife has been trying to teach the children in the meantime, but she's expecting their fourth child and is sick most mornings." For the first time since arriving in Los Alamos, Theodora allowed herself to consider possibilities beyond mere survival. "I've never taught before." "Can you read, write, and cipher?" "Yes, of course." "Can you control a room of 20 children aged 6 to 16? Theodora thought of her 3 younger siblings, all gone now, her brother to the war, her sisters to marriage and distance. "I believe I can." "Then you're qualified." Xavier smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "We'll go see Reverend Matthews tomorrow." That night, Theodora lay awake long after the sounds of the town had quieted. Her window was open to catch the cool desert breeze, and she could see stars scattered like salt across the black sky. The day had not gone as expected. Nothing in her life ever seemed to, but she felt an unfamiliar sensation. Hope. She thought of Xavier Fleming with his quiet strength and unwavering gaze. He'd shown her kindness without pity, respect without conditions. In a world that had taught her to expect little from others, especially men, his simple decency stood out like a beacon. Theodora didn't allow herself to dwell on his handsome face or the way his rare smile transformed his features. Such thoughts were dangerous, leading only to disappointment. Men might admire her spirit or intelligence, but none would want a wife who couldn't walk beside them, who needed help with the simplest tasks, who couldn't dance at gatherings or easily bear children. No, Xavier's kindness was that of a lawman protecting a vulnerable newcomer, nothing more. And that would have to be enough. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Theodora dressed carefully in her best skirt and shirtwaist, arranged her hair in a neat bun, and made her way to the hotel dining room for breakfast. She was earlier than most guests, with only an elderly couple occupying a far table. Mrs. Palmer appeared with coffee and a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Marshal Fleming said to tell you he'll be by at 9 to take you to meet Reverend Matthews. Thank you. Theodora sipped her coffee, savoring its rich bitterness. Mrs. Palmer, I wonder if you might know someone interested in buying a wedding dress. I have no use for it now, and… Heavens, child, what a thought! Mrs. Palmer's kind face creased with concern. That dress is your future. I think we both know my future doesn't include a wedding, Theodora said pragmatically. Mrs. Palmer sat down across from her, her expression serious. Miss Jensen, may I speak plainly, please? Los Alamos is growing, new people arrive every week. Not all of them are as narrow-minded as you might expect. She patted Theodora's hand. Keep your dress. The right man won't care that you need crutches to walk down the aisle. Theodora wanted to believe her, but experience had taught her otherwise. Still, she nodded. I'll consider it, Mrs. Palmer rose, smoothing her apron. Now eat up. The Reverend likes punctuality. Xavier arrived precisely at 9, his marshal's badge gleaming on his chest, his hat in his hands, ready to meet your future employer. The church stood at the east end of town, a simple white clapboard building with a steeple that seemed to reach for the heavens. Behind it was a smaller building, the schoolhouse, Xavier explained as he helped Theodora navigate the sandy path. Reverend Matthews was in the schoolhouse, attempting to control what appeared to be absolute chaos. 20 children of varying ages raced around the room, shouting and laughing. A heavily pregnant woman sat at the teacher's desk, her face pale, her hands pressed to her temples. Children. Xavier's voice cut through the din like a knife. Immediately, the room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the marshal. Take your seats. The children scrambled to obey, filing into desks arranged in neat rows. The pregnant woman Mrs. Matthews, Theodora presumed, gave Xavier a look of profound gratitude. Reverend Mrs. Matthews, Xavier said. This is Miss Theodora Jensen, newly arrived from Santa Fe. She's looking for a position, and I believe your need and her skills align perfectly. Reverend Matthews was a tall, thin man with kind eyes and a scholarly demeanor. He studied Theodora thoughtfully, his gaze briefly taking in her crutches before returning to her face. Miss Jensen, do you have experience teaching? I taught my younger siblings, and I helped with the younger children at our church in Santa Fe, Theodora replied honestly. I can read, write, and solve complex mathematical problems. I know basic science and history. Most importantly, I believe every child deserves education, regardless of background or circumstance. Mrs. Matthews smiled weakly. Can you start today? Within the hour, Theodora found herself alone with 20 children ranging from angelic to mischievous, all watching her with undisguised curiosity. She took a deep breath, tapped her ruler on the desk for attention, and began. My name is Miss Jensen, she said clearly. I will be your teacher until further notice. I expect attention when I speak, diligence in your studies, and kindness toward one another. She paused, looking at each child in turn. Yes, I use crutches to walk. No, I cannot stand without them. Yes, you may ask questions about it once, politely, and after lessons are complete. Now, please open your readers to page 27. The morning passed in a blur of reading lessons, arithmetic, and getting to know her pupils. The older children were initially skeptical of her authority, but Theodora had spent a lifetime being underestimated. By noon, she had established order in her classroom through a combination of firm expectations and genuine interest in each child's progress. When Xavier stopped by at midday, he found the children quietly working at their desks while Theodora moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. I see you have everything under control, he said from the doorway, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Theodora looked up, a strand of hair escaping her neat bun. Marshal Fleming, come to check on your recommendation. Come to invite the new school teacher to lunch, he corrected. Children, you're dismissed for the noon meal. Be back in 1 hour. The children filed out, some stopping to offer shy smiles to Theodora. When the last had gone, she sank into the chair behind the teacher's desk, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. Harder than facing down outlaws? Xavier asked, approaching her desk. Different, Theodora replied. Both require vigilance and quick thinking. He laughed, the sound warming the sunlit classroom. Come, Mrs. Sullivan at the cafe makes the best fried chicken in the territory. Over lunch, Xavier told her more about Los Alamos and its inhabitants. The town had begun as a mining settlement 20 years earlier, but had grown into a center for ranchers and farmers in the region. The railroad would bring more growth, more opportunities, and more challenges. Town's changing, Xavier said. Some folks welcome it, others resist. And you? Theodora asked, Where do you stand? Progress is inevitable, he replied, his expression thoughtful. Best to guide it toward justice rather than fight against it. A philosopher, Marshal, Theodora smiled. Los Alamos is full of surprises. Speaking of surprises, Xavier lowered his voice, Blackwell was asking about you this morning. Theodora's smile faded. What did he want? To know where you're staying, what your plans are. Xavier's eyes were serious. Be careful around him, Theodora. He doesn't take rejection well. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her heart quicken. I can handle Lawrence Blackwell, she said with more confidence than she felt. Xavier studied her face. I believe you can handle most anything. Still, it doesn't hurt to have allies. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Theodora taught during the day, gradually winning the respect and affection of her students. In the evenings, she often dined with Xavier, who seemed to find reasons to escort her home afterward, his hand steady beneath her elbow as she navigated the uneven boardwalks. She became a familiar figure in Los Alamos, greeted by name as she made her way through town on her crutches. Mrs. Palmer introduced her to the Ladies' Aid Society, where she found unexpected friendship among the women who gathered weekly to sew and discuss town matters. Lawrence Blackwell remained a shadow at the edges of her new life. Sometimes she would feel eyes on her, turning to find him watching from the doorway of his mercantile. Once he approached her after church, offering to carry her Bible, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. I'm perfectly capable, thank you, she had replied, tucking the book under her arm. Such independence, he'd said, his voice silky. Admirable, if somewhat inconvenient for a woman. Before she could reply, Xavier had appeared at her side, his presence enough to make Blackwell retreat with a mocking bow. He's persistent, Xavier observed as they walked toward the hotel. Men like Lawrence Blackwell see women as possessions, Theodora said. He doesn't want me, he wants what I represent, a challenge to his pride. Xavier was silent for a moment. And what about men like me? What do we want? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Theodora's heart raced as she considered her answer. I think men like you, Xavier Fleming, want justice, fairness. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Maybe even happiness, though you're too practical to admit it. His laugh was soft. Perhaps you're right. They had reached the hotel, and Xavier held the door for her as she maneuvered her crutches over the threshold. In the cool dimness of the lobby, he paused. There's a social at the church next Saturday, he said, his voice casual though his eyes were intent. Music, dancing, food. I don't dance, Theodora reminded him gently. Neither do I, he replied, but I eat, and I'd be honored if you'd accompany me. Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and unexpected. I'd like that very much. The week leading up to the social was filled with anticipation. Theodora found herself watching the clock during school hours, counting the minutes until dismissal when Xavier often appeared at her classroom door with some small gift wildflowers from the prairie, a piece of rock candy, once a beautiful quill pen for grading papers. The Ladies' Aid, learning of her acceptance of Xavier's invitation, descended upon her room at the hotel the day before the social, arms laden with fabric and ribbons. You can't wear that old blue dress again, declared Mrs. Sullivan, the doctor's wife, a robust woman with a no-nonsense manner. Not for your first proper outing with the Marshal. It's not proper courting, Theodora protested weakly. Even as the women measured and pinned and stitched around her, Mrs. Palmer snorted. That man has been sweet on you since the day he brought you to town. The whole town sees it, even if you're both too stubborn to admit it. By evening, they had transformed one of Theodora's plain skirts and shirtwaists into something approaching elegance. The skirt was now adorned with a panel of deep green velvet from Mrs. Sullivan's scrap box, and the white shirtwaist sported a new lace collar donated by the Reverend's wife. "There," Mrs. Palmer said, standing back to admire their work. "Simple but lovely, like you, dear." Theodora blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you, all of you, Mrs. Sullivan patted her hand. "That's what neighbors do. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's an important day." The social began at 6 as the heat of the day finally relented and a cool breeze blew in from the mountains. Xavier arrived at the hotel precisely on time, wearing a clean black suit and a new hat. He stood in the lobby, turning the hat in his hands, looking so uncharacteristically nervous that Theodora felt her own anxiety ease. "Miss Jensen," he said when she appeared, his voice warm with admiration. "You look beautiful." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, you're quite handsome yourself, Marshal." He offered his arm, and they made their way slowly to the church. The yard had been transformed with paper lanterns strung between trees, tables laden with food, and a small platform where several men tuned instruments. Children darted between adults, playing tag in the gathering dusk, while couples and families spread blankets on the grass. Reverend Matthews greeted them warmly. "Miss Jensen, Marshal, so glad you could join us. There's a special place reserved for you by the musicians." He led them to a bench positioned with a clear view of the makeshift dance floor but set slightly apart. Theodora understood the thoughtfulness of the arrangement. She could observe the dancing without feeling conspicuous for not participating. Xavier helped her settle on the bench, then asked, "Punch, please." She nodded, watching as he made his way through the crowd. A shadow fell across her, and Theodora looked up to find Lawrence Blackwell standing before her, resplendent in an expensive suit, his watch chain gleaming in the lantern light. "Miss Jensen," he said, his smile cold. "All alone?" "Not for long," she replied evenly. "The Marshal has gone to fetch refreshments." Blackwell's lip curled. "Ah yes, your faithful protector, how touching." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Does he know what, Mr. Blackwell, about your limitations?" His eyes flickered meaningfully downward. "A man has certain expectations of a woman, certain needs." Fury rose in Theodora's throat, hot and choking. Before she could respond, Xavier was there, 2 cups of punch in his hands and thunder in his expression. "Blackwell," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "you're blocking the lady's view." Blackwell straightened, adjusting his waistcoat. "Marshal, just paying my respects to our new schoolteacher." He tipped his hat to Theodora. "Enjoy your evening." As he walked away, Theodora released a shaky breath. Xavier handed her a cup of punch, then sat beside her, his thigh warm against hers. "What did he want?" he asked quietly. "To upset me," Theodora replied. "To remind me of my place." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Your place is wherever you choose it to be." The music started, a lively fiddle tune that brought couples onto the dance floor. Xavier set his cup aside and turned to face her. "Theodora Jensen," he said, his voice serious despite the festive surroundings. "I have something to ask you." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "Yes, I'm not a man of many words," he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I found you on that trail 2 months ago, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Traveling alone, facing an uncertain future, holding your head high despite everything." "Xavier," he held up a hand. "Please let me finish. These weeks, getting to know you, seeing how you face each day with courage and grace, you've become precious to me, more precious than I thought possible." Theodora couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This couldn't be happening. Men didn't fall in love with women who couldn't walk, who needed help with the simplest tasks. Yet Xavier's gray eyes held nothing but sincerity as he continued. "I know it's too soon. I know you came here expecting something different. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would be honored to court you properly, with intention." Tears blurred her vision. "Xavier, I'm broken. You deserve." "Don't," he said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Don't tell me what I deserve. I know what I want, who I want." "You're not broken, Theodora. You're exactly as you should be." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he reached up to brush it away, his touch gentle on her skin. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, just think about it." The music changed to a slower tune, and around them couples drew close, swaying to the gentle rhythm. Theodora looked at their joined hands, his strong and brown against her smaller, paler ones. "I don't need to think about it," she said softly. "My answer is yes." Joy blazed across his face, transforming his features. Yes, she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Xavier lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "May I kiss you properly?" he asked, his voice husky. In answer, Theodora leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips were warm and sure against hers, his hand coming up to cup her cheek as if she were something precious. When they parted, the world around them seemed to have faded away, the music, the laughter, the lantern light, all secondary to the shining truth between them. "I think," Xavier said, his smile wider than she'd ever seen it, "that Reverend Matthews will be pleased to perform another ceremony soon." Happiness bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. "I think you might be right." The courtship of Theodora Jensen and Xavier Fleming became the talk of Los Alamos. He called for her each morning, walking her to the schoolhouse before beginning his rounds. In the evenings, they could be seen strolling along the boardwalks, his pace measured to match her steady progress on her crutches, their heads bent in conversation. On Sundays after church, they took picnic lunches to the small creek outside town, where Xavier spread a blanket in the shade and read poetry aloud while Theodora worked on mending or grading papers. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, content in each other's presence. Not everyone approved of their match. Theodora occasionally overheard whispers, pitying comments about Xavier settling for a crippled woman, speculation about her ability to be a proper wife. Such moments stung, but Xavier's unwavering regard was a balm to old wounds. Lawrence Blackwell remained a dark presence in the background of their happiness. His gaze followed Theodora around town, his smile tightening whenever he saw her with Xavier. Twice he approached her when she was alone, offering veiled insults disguised as concern. "Such a burden you must be to our good Marshal," he'd said one afternoon as she left the schoolhouse. "A man in his position needs a wife who can stand beside him, not one he must constantly assist." Theodora had straightened to her full height, meeting his gaze directly. "The only burden I see is the weight of your bitterness, Mr. Blackwell. Good day." She'd related the encounter to Xavier that evening over dinner at the hotel. "He's becoming bolder," Xavier frowned, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I don't like it." "He's trying to provoke you," Theodora said. "Don't give him the satisfaction." "If he threatens you, he won't," she assured him, though she was less certain than she pretended. "He's too clever for that." As summer deepened into fall, wedding plans progressed. The ceremony was set for the first Saturday in October, when the aspen trees in the mountains would be golden and the air crisp with promise. Theodora wrote to her sisters in Kansas, inviting them to attend, though she knew the journey might be too difficult on such short notice. The women of Los Alamos rallied around her, offering advice, gifts, and practical assistance. Mrs. Palmer insisted Theodora move to a larger room at the hotel, more suitable for receiving callers and preparing for a wedding. Mrs. Sullivan and the ladies' aide took charge of refreshments for the reception, while Reverend Matthews's wife organized decorations for the church. One evening in late September, Xavier escorted Theodora back to the hotel after dinner at the cafe. The air held a hint of coming winter, and she shivered slightly beneath her shawl. "Cold?" Xavier asked, draping his coat around her shoulders. "A little," she admitted. "Winter comes early in the mountains. You'll be warm enough in our home," he promised, his eyes soft in the gathering dusk. "I've been adding extra insulation to the walls, and the fireplace in the bedroom draws well." Their home. The thought still filled Theodora with wonder. Xavier had purchased a small house at the edge of town when he'd first become Marshal 5 years earlier. Over the past months, he'd been modifying it with her needs in mind, widening doorways, building a ramp at the back entrance, lowering shelves in the kitchen. "You think of everything," she said, leaning into his side as they walked. "Not everything," he replied, a teasing note in his voice. "I still haven't figured out how to convince Mrs. Sullivan that green beans don't need to be cooked for 3 hours. Theodora laughed, the sound ringing in the quiet street. "Some battles can't be won, Marshal." They had reached the hotel, and Xavier helped her up the steps to the porch. Before they could enter, the door swung open and Mrs. Palmer emerged, her face drawn with worry. "There you are," she said. "Miss Jensen, you have visitors." "Visitors?" Theodora exchanged a puzzled glance with Xavier. Who would? The question died on her lips as 2 women stepped out onto the porch. Both were fair-haired and blue-eyed like Theodora, though one was considerably older. "Theodora," the younger woman cried, rushing forward to embrace her. "Oh, it's really you, Tabitha, Elizabeth." Theodora's voice broke as she returned her sister's embrace. When did you? We received your letter," the older woman Elizabeth explained, stepping forward to take Theodora's hands. "We couldn't miss your wedding." "But the journey, the expense, was worth every penny and every mile," Tabitha insisted. She turned to Xavier, her eyes assessing. "So you're the man who stole our sister's heart." Xavier removed his hat, his expression solemn. "Xavier Fleming, madam, it's an honor to meet Theodora's family." Elizabeth studied him for a long moment before her face relaxed into a smile. "The honor is ours, Marshal. We've worried about Theo since our parents died. To know she's found happiness here, well, it eases our minds considerably." Mrs. Palmer bustled forward. "Let's continue this reunion inside, shall we? I've prepared tea and there's fresh apple pie." The evening passed in a blur of laughter, tears, and stories. Theodora's sisters had both married farmers in Kansas, and Tabitha had 2 small children waiting at home with their father. Elizabeth, widowed young, lived with Tabitha's family and helped raise the children. "We wanted to come when we heard about Lawrence Blackwell's proposal," Elizabeth explained, "but with the spring planting and then the harvest. It's better this way," Theodora assured her. "If you'd come then, you wouldn't be here now for the right wedding." Later, when Xavier had taken his leave with promises to return in the morning, the sisters sat in Theodora's room, speaking in the intimate tones of women who had shared a lifetime of confidences. "He loves you," Tabitha said, brushing out Theodora's hair as she had when they were girls. "Anyone can see it in the way he looks at you. I still can't quite believe it," Theodora admitted, "that he could want someone like me. Someone intelligent, brave, and kind." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Why wouldn't he? You know what I mean," Theodora gestured toward her legs. "Most men want a whole woman." Tabitha's brushstrokes became more vigorous. "If I ever hear you call yourself less than whole again, Theodora Ann Jensen, I will dump a bucket of cold water over your head. You are exactly as God made you, and that man downstairs sees you completely." Tears stung Theodora's eyes. "I've missed you both so much." Elizabeth squeezed her hand. "We're here now, and we're going to help you prepare for the most important day of your life." The day before the wedding dawned clear and cool, the sky an impossible blue above the mountains. Theodora awoke early, her heart so full it seemed to press against her ribs. After breakfast with her sisters, she found herself restless, unable to focus on final preparations. On impulse, she decided to visit the schoolhouse. Classes had been dismissed for the day in honor of her wedding, but she thought the familiar surroundings might calm her nerves. The schoolhouse was quiet and sun-dappled as she entered, her crutches making a familiar rhythm on the wooden floor. She moved to the teacher's desk, running her fingers over the smooth surface, remembering her first day facing 20 curious children. The sound of the door opening made her look up, expecting to see Xavier or perhaps one of her sisters. Instead, Lawrence Blackwell stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, straightening, "what brings you to the schoolhouse?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I came to offer congratulations to the bride-to-be." His smile didn't reach his eyes, "and to give you one last chance to reconsider." Theodora's grip tightened on her crutches. "There's nothing to reconsider, Mr. Blackwell. I'm marrying Xavier tomorrow." "The half-breed Marshal," Blackwell sneered, "a man of no background, no fortune, no prospects beyond this dusty town." "A man of honor and kindness," Theodora countered, "worth more than all your money and pretensions." Blackwell moved closer, his eyes hard. "You could have had everything with me, a fine house, servants to tend to your needs. Instead you choose poverty with a man barely better than an Indian." Anger flared in Theodora's chest. "I think you should leave, Mr. Blackwell, or what?" he taunted. "You'll hobble after me." "Call for help that won't come." He was between her and the door now, and for the first time real fear coiled in Theodora's stomach. She glanced around, seeking a weapon and escape. "Xavier knows I'm here," she lied. "He'll be coming to fetch me any moment." "No, he won't," Blackwell said with cold certainty. "Your precious Marshal is 10 miles away, dealing with a disturbance at the Watson Ranch." He smiled. Amazing how convincing young Tommy Watson can be when properly motivated to report an emergency. Theodora's mind raced. The schoolhouse was at the edge of town, unlikely to have many passers-by, especially with most of the town busy with wedding preparations. Blackwell seemed to read her thoughts. "No one will interrupt us, Theodora. We have all the time in the world for you to reconsider your foolish decision." "I will never marry you," she said firmly, though her heart pounded with fear, his face contorted with rage. "You think you have a choice, a crippled spinster with no family, no money. You should be grateful for my interest." He lunged forward, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Theodora swung one of her crutches instinctively, connecting with his shin. Blackwell cursed, stumbling back but recovered quickly and advanced again. "You'll regret that," he snarled, reaching for her. The door of the schoolhouse burst open with such force it slammed against the wall. Xavier stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury, his gun drawn. "Step away from her, Blackwell," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Blackwell froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Marshal, this isn't what it looks like." "It looks like you're threatening my fiancée," Xavier said, moving into the room, his gun steady. "It looks like you lured me away from town with a false report. It looks like you're about to spend your wedding night in a jail cell." Relief made Theodora's knees weak, and she sagged against the desk. "Xavier, how did you—" "Tommy Watson has a conscience," Xavier said, his eyes never leaving Blackwell. "He rode after me, confessed that Blackwell paid him to lie." He gestured with his gun. "Outside, Blackwell, now." "You're making a mistake," Blackwell said, his voice smooth once more. "Miss Jensen and I were merely having a conversation that left bruises on her arm." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Move." For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might resist, but then he shrugged elaborately and walked toward the door. As he passed Xavier, he suddenly lunged, attempting to knock the gun from his hand. Xavier was ready. He sidestepped, bringing the butt of his pistol down hard on Blackwell's temple. The larger man crumpled to the floor unconscious. "Are you all right?" Xavier was at Theodora's side in an instant, his hands gentle as they examined the bruise forming on her arm. "I am now," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. He didn't have time to do anything else. Xavier pulled her against his chest, his arms strong around her. "When Tommy told me what Blackwell had planned, I've never ridden so fast in my life." Theodora buried her face against his shirt, breathing in the familiar scent of him: soap, leather, and sage. "My hero," she murmured, attempting a light tone despite her racing heart. Xavier's arms tightened. "Always," he promised. Blackwell spent the night in jail and the following weeks awaiting trial for assault and attempted kidnapping. The judge, riding circuit through Los Alamos, sentenced him to 5 years in the territorial prison. His mercantile was sold to pay his debts, and Los Alamos saw the last of Lawrence Blackwell, but that was later. On the day after the confrontation in the schoolhouse, Los Alamos witnessed a different kind of justice, the kind that comes with love fulfilled and promises made. The church was filled to capacity, decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. At the front, Xavier stood beside Reverend Matthews, his black suit brushed to perfection, his face solemn but his eyes alight with anticipation. In the back of the church, Theodora waited with her sisters. Her dress, her mother's wedding gown, lovingly altered, fell in soft ivory folds to the floor. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers. In her hands she held a bouquet of wildflowers and sage. "Ready?" Elizabeth asked, straightening the lace at Theodora's collar. Theodora nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I just wish." She hesitated. "In the stories, the father walks the bride down the aisle." Tabitha squeezed her hand. "You don't need anyone to give you away, Theo. You're giving yourself freely and completely." "But how will I?" Theodora gestured to her crutches, her dress, the long aisle ahead. The church doors opened, and a figure appeared: Dr. Sullivan, Los Alamos's physician and Xavier's closest friend. "Miss Jensen," he said, bowing slightly. "The groom sent me with a message." "What message?" Theodora asked, puzzled. He said, "Wait." Dr. Sullivan smiled. "Just that, wait." Before Theodora could question further, the music began. Mrs. Matthews at the piano, playing the traditional wedding march. The congregation rose, turning expectantly toward the back of the church. And then Xavier was there, striding down the aisle toward her, his face determined. He reached her side, bowed to her sisters, and then turned to Theodora. "May I?" he asked simply. Understanding dawned, and tears sprang to Theodora's eyes. Are you certain everyone will stare? Let them, Xavier said, his voice firm. I want everyone to see that I am the luckiest man alive. He handed her crutches to Dr. Sullivan, then swept Theodora into his arms. She looped her arms around his neck, her heart so full she thought it might burst. My brave, beautiful bride, Xavier murmured, for her ears alone. Let me carry you to our future. And so Theodora Jensen was carried down the aisle not by her father, but by the man who loved her without reservation, without condition, without end. The man who saw not what she lacked, but all that she was. The man who would be her husband, her partner, her home. At the altar, Xavier set her gently on her feet, Dr. Sullivan stepping forward to hand her the crutches. But Theodora kept one arm around Xavier's strong shoulders, unwilling to let go of this man who had taught her that love sees beyond limitation to the heart beneath. Dearly beloved, Reverend Matthews began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. We are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other the perfect complement, the missing piece, the answer to a prayer perhaps not even spoken aloud. Theodora looked up into Xavier's gray eyes, seeing in them all the promise of their future, the home they would make, the life they would build, the love they would share. And she knew, with a certainty that outweighed all doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. I do, she said when the time came, her voice clear and sure. I do, Xavier echoed, his hand warm around hers. And when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier didn't simply kiss his bride, he swept her into his arms again, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Which, to him, she was. The reception lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, food and laughter. Theodora sat beside Xavier at the head table, watching the celebration with joy in her heart. Her sisters danced with local ranchers, making plans to extend their stay in Los Alamos by another week. Mrs. Palmer wept openly into her handkerchief, declaring it the most beautiful wedding she'd ever witnessed. Even Dr. Sullivan unbent enough to attempt a waltz with Mrs. Matthews, to the amusement of all. As twilight deepened into night, Xavier leaned close to Theodora. Ready to see our home, Mrs. Fleming, Mrs. Fleming. The name sent a thrill through her. Yes, she said simply. Xavier helped her into the wagon he'd decorated with ribbons and flowers, then climbed up beside her. With a wave to the gathered well-wishers, they set off toward the small house at the edge of town that would be their home. The house glowed with lamplight as they approached, smoke curling from the chimney into the star-strewn sky. Xavier set the brake and turned to his bride. Welcome home, Theodora, he said softly. He carried her across the threshold, setting her gently in a chair by the fire before going back to retrieve her crutches and their belongings from the wagon. When he returned, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Are you happy? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Theodora looked around the small, neat room at the bookshelves he'd built at a height she could reach, at the wide doorways that would accommodate her crutches, at the man kneeling before her with love in his eyes, and felt a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. Happier than I ever thought possible, she whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. Outside, the stars wheeled above Los Alamos, a town where a crippled woman had found not pity but respect, not charity but opportunity, not loneliness but love. A town where a lawman of mixed heritage had found in an unlikely stranger the companion of his heart and mind. A town that would witness, in the years to come, the unfolding story of Xavier and Theodora Fleming, a story of challenges met together, of joys shared, of a love that saw beyond the surface to the truth beneath. A story that began, as the best stories do, with courage, compassion, and the simple, profound truth that love sees with the heart, not with the eyes. 3 years later, Theodora sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Xavier teach their son to walk. Thomas, named for Xavier's father, was 18 months old and determined to master the art of locomotion, his chubby legs wobbling as he took tentative steps toward his father's outstretched arms. That's it, little man, Xavier encouraged, his face alight with pride. Come to Papa. Thomas toppled forward, caught safely in Xavier's hands, and squealed with delight. Xavier swung him up into the air, provoking more giggles before bringing him over to Theodora. Mama's turn, he said, settling the boy in her lap. Theodora wrapped her arms around her son, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. Thomas had his father's gray eyes and her fair hair, a perfect blend of them both. His birth had been difficult. Dr. Sullivan had feared for both mother and child, but they had emerged victorious, if exhausted. Xavier sat beside her on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. Mrs. Sullivan says he'll be running before we know it. Heaven help us then, Theodora laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. Los Alamos had changed in the years since their wedding. The railroad had arrived, bringing new businesses and residents. Xavier had been elected mayor the previous year, his fair dealing and integrity winning over even those who had once looked askance at his Navajo heritage. Theodora still taught at the schoolhouse, though she now had an assistant to help with the growing number of students. Their home had grown too, with an additional bedroom for Thomas and a small study where Xavier handled town business in the evenings. The garden Theodora had planted their first spring was now lush with vegetables and flowers, tended with the help of a local girl who came 3 times a week. Life wasn't perfect. Xavier still faced prejudice at times, and Theodora's legs still ached in the cold winter months, but it was rich and full and their own. "Penny for your thoughts," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Theodora smiled, watching as Thomas played with the buttons on her dress. "I was just thinking about that day at the church when you carried me down the aisle. Best decision I ever made," Xavier said firmly. "People still talk about it, you know," she said, her tone light. "Mrs. Palmer told me just last week that young Sally Thompson is insisting her future husband must carry her down the aisle, just like the mayor did with Mrs. Fleming." Xavier laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest against her cheek. "Trendsetter." "Hardly," Theodora scoffed. "Just a man too stubborn to let a pair of crutches stand in the way of what he wanted." "What I wanted?" Xavier turned to look at her, his expression serious despite his smile. "What I wanted was you, Theodora, not despite your crutches, not because of them, just you exactly as you are." After 3 years of marriage, such declarations still had the power to make her heart skip. "I love you, Xavier Fleming, and I love you, Theodora Fleming." His kiss was gentle, mindful of Thomas between them, always have, always will. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Theodora thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, from a crippled woman left at a church door to a teacher, a wife, a mother, loved not in spite of her differences, but with a wholeness that encompassed all that she was. She hadn't walked down the aisle on her wedding day, but she had been carried, not out of pity but out of love, by a man who saw in her everything she'd never dared to hope for, and in the end, that had made all the difference.